straight from the mayor's mouth, with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Hello everyone and welcome to Straight from the Mayor's Mouth. Hello there Matt, how are you? And welcome to the school holidays.
Yeah, big week or big 2 weeks for school holidays. It's actually interesting. Spring and autumn are our busiest time frames from a tourism perspective. Beautiful weather, both spring and autumn times in Dubbo, and people want to come out and enjoy regional areas around those times. But this is still, that's right, but this is still a busy time. I mean, some people might want to escape up further north, up Queensland way during these school holidays, but people still want to get out and experience various areas. And you might have some people from down south, down Victoria way, that find it a bit cold and coming up to Dubbo, this sort of area is a bit warmer for them and not too far to travel.
Absolutely. Well, look at the coast during the last week there. They had nothing but rain, and out here we had sunshine and 18 degrees. And I was out doing the parkrun on Saturday morning. It was about 8 degrees. It was absolutely glorious. So the weather right now is absolutely perfect. I do think there's a little bit of rain coming during later in the week, but hey, get out and about and enjoy this. What is this wonderful time of the year? Yeah,
I think a couple of days' time we've got a bit of rain coming. But I think the nice thing is, even though it gets cold overnight, I don't care too much about that because I'm in bed. So tucked up in bed, it's okay.
Right.
But during the day, even if the temperature shows 10, 12, 14 degrees, some of those lower temperatures, as we know, temperatures are taken in the shade. And if it's a sunny day, which it still has been most of the time, then it's still quite nice. Even down at those temperatures, if you're out in the sun, it's quite nice as when you duck into the shade that it gets a bit cold, or if there's a bit of a breeze. But it's still not too bad in terms of weather conditions.
Get out and walk around us and enjoy it, I suggest. And welcome to all our new visitors who are coming through Dubbo over the course of the next couple of weeks. Now, Matt, we often hear discussions about grants. Now, normally that's focused on grants being obtained by council from state and federal governments. But organisations in our community can also receive grants from council. Now, I see that I can see here that applications are now open for 3 council grant programs. Talk me through it. How does, if I'm a community group, how do I apply for these grants? And what are they?
I'd say go on our site and look. There are 3 different separate programs there. And this is actually interesting. We've been having a bit of a discussion about this at council with councillors, because it's important to make things simple. We did take 2 different programs and roll them into one program.
I remember that, yes.
So that's been a positive move. But even now, we've still got 3 separate programs left.
So that other one we talked about separate to this grant program, is that right?
That's been 2 other programs are rolled into one of these 3 now.
Oh, okay, right.
And then there's 2 other separate programs.
Okay, yep.
And this is part of the logic when we discussed it with councillors and with staff. It got to the point where, you should put in for this. Oh, no, not quite that one. Maybe this one over here. Yeah. Does your criteria quite match? And so the logic was, we've got money to give to community groups for various things. Maybe we should roll all up into one. Now, that hasn't happened yet. We've condensed 2 of them into one, but we've still got another 2. So at the moment, as it stands right now, applications are open for these 3 different programs until the end of the month. And you've got the Community Services Fund, so that's the one that we rolled 2 previously into one.
Right, yes.
You've got $168,611.21.
And 21 cents, quite an interesting figure.
It is.
How'd you come to that figure?
That's because we brought forward some funds that weren't used in the last financial year.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that was part of the logic there, was that there were funds allocated in certain buckets, and we had more applications than were available in some buckets and less applications than we had money for in other buckets.
Okay.
So that's why we're slowly moving that path. No decision's been made there yet, but that's certainly a discussion point about rolling all these into one. But so that amount there, that's in the first round in the Community Services Fund. Then you've got 2 other programs or buckets, if you like, under the Event Assistance Program. So you've got the Community Events Fund, which has got $10,000 in it in the first round, and you've got the Destination Events Fund, which has got $30,000 in it.
So Community Events Fund and a Destination Events Fund.
Yeah. So I know.
Okay, I'm not going to get too pedantic here on this, but
Community Events Fund supports locally organised events that deliver social and cultural benefits. The Destination Events Fund supports events that help elevate the Dubbo region as a destination for events and assists in driving tourism and delivering significant economic benefits.
Right.
Now, again, I would say that there's probably a grey area there. Those 2 could say, which one do you go into? And this is part of the problem we have.
I was thinking from a community body point of view, like which one should I be applying for?
That's right. And you read the rules, and sometimes we look at the application and we go, they should have put it in under this one. We better go back and talk to them and say that's the way you do it. And that's why I don't like exactly the way it is at the moment. It's the way it is, and that's fine. It's grown, it's morphed to this particular outcome now. But I think there's potentially there's some room to change it around a little
I
bit.
think so. So the aim eventually, hopefully, is maybe to look towards doing another, maybe a giant banner of community grant funds or something.
Correct. That would be my personal view. This is not a council view.
Yeah.
And certainly some other councillors have got the idea that let's make it simple for people to apply for some of these funds.
Yep.
So the idea would be roll them all up, all the money you've got in each of these different ones, roll them all up into one
Yep.
and say, we've got funds that are available for whatever community aspect you like. Not obviously, I want to go down the pub on the weekend and spend a few dollars. No, you can't
Yes.
apply for that. It's got to be obviously
Yep.
community focused, community organisation, not for profit, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But eventually I would like to see one pool and then multiple application times through the year,
Yep.
but just making sure that it would fit the criteria of one of these, but without having it broken up. And again, it feels somewhat disappointing where you've got one fund oversubscribed and other funds
That's
undersubscribed
right.
or vice
And
versa.
I think if you had it under the one umbrella, so to speak, there's probably less a chance of that happening then, wouldn't you?
Absolutely right, because some of them are heavily oversubscribed. I know
Yes.
we received applications for $50,000 or $60,000 when we've got 10,000 to give
Yeah,
away,
right.
that type of thing. So yeah, so
So-
Smarty grants.
I was
if you
going to
want
say, yeah, the next question obviously be where do you go to apply for this?
Yeah, so we used to take applications via fax back in the old days and
Right,
paper
yes, yeah.
applications and emails. We've moved now, and many organisations have done this, to a process called Smarty Grants. Anyone that's done grants is familiar with that. You can look on our website and it'll tell you how to go there and do it. But the idea is just to streamline the process. And some people have said, well, what about me? I don't have internet access. I don't have a computer. You can go to the library and use a computer there. You can use Smarty Grants. It's fairly easy to go through that process. But most of these groups have got multiple people. It's not one person who says, I don't have internet access, so I can't do it. It's usually a community group and someone in that community group, someone on the committee.
And let's face it, in the world today, as a community operation, you have to be online to be able to accessing as many people as you possibly can. And for those
that's right.
groups that aren't, well, probably advice might be to get somebody online at least so you can start to do this sort of thing.
Get someone on your committee that's got a computer maybe. But
Absolutely.
you could go to the library and do that. So Smarty Grants, 31st of July, it closes. All three of these applications close.
Yep.
And then basically that'll go through a review process and then go to our August 2024 council meeting.
Good. And this happens twice a year?
Twice a year at the moment. And even that, I'd personally prefer to see it 4 times a year, but then again, you want to make sure you're not putting too much extra workload on our staff, because there is work to go through and look at these applications, make sure they fit the criteria, do some checking on them in general. So there's work there. I get that. So at this stage, twice a year.
The only last question I want to ask you in regards to the grants is, like, if I'm a community group and I don't have anyone who's really experienced in regards to putting forward these grants and going through the proposals and how it all sort of stuff is done, is there anyone on council I can speak to there to support me, to help me put together a grant proposal?
Kind of.
Kind of.
You've got to be careful as our staff. If you come along and say, can I get some help? They're not going to do it for you, because that would seem to be somewhat conflicted.
Yeah, that's right. So there may be the same people deciding on the grants at the end of the day possibly as well.
It might be. It probably wouldn't be. It'd probably be more some of the front counter staff who might give you some help and give you some direction. But they can't be writing the application for you. They can't be giving you the words, for example.
Yep.
But there are organisations out there, there's no doubt about it, that there are people who do some grant writing processes. And we do run some workshops from time to time. I've popped into workshops. I haven't attended the full workshop, but I've popped in when workshops have been on, where they've been giving various groups help or some tips or just some step-by-step processes and how to fill those in. So I suppose 3 things. If you've got the desire to do that, keep an eye out for some of those workshops and go and attend one. Or if you just want some basic help, some basic direction, go along and see our staff at council, keeping in mind they're not going to complete it for you.
Yep.
Or go and seek out some of those different organisations in our community that do grant writing or help organisations with grant writing, and I'm sure they do that for probably a very small fee to help you out and go down that path to help you fill those in. And again, do that all before the 31st of July.
31st of July, go to Smarty Grants online. Is that
Smarty
right?
Grant, or go to our website.
Just go to the website?
Yeah, go to our dubbo.nsw.gov.au and get those applications in.
Wonderful.
And I look forward to handing out those checks, because it's
Yeah,
exciting.
it's a
to
big
hand
part of
out
the time. That's
money to people to say, go and do some good in the community, and they do. They do some wonderful work in the community.
Oh, absolutely. Now, while we're on grants, I noticed a General memo this week discussed the issue of the uncertainty of government grants and how councils are now having to be very innovative with their funding streams. Now, we spoke about the project last week, but do we want to elaborate in a newspaper article this week?
Sure.
Any thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on in regards to just tell the listeners a little bit more about it.
So we did talk last week about Squadron Energy, about the $3.6 million we've received from Squadron Energy. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But there's no doubt about it that gaining money from government, state or federal government, seems becoming more and more difficult. It's more competitive, and we keep hearing, in particular from the state government, that the funds have dried up. There's no funds available there. And to give you an idea, I went back and looked over the last 6 years of the funds that we've received, Dubbo Regional Council has received for capital grants. So I started in the 2017-18 year. Now, that was glory days for grants because that was just after the amalgamation.
Oh, right,
you remember,
yes.
12th of May 2016, there was an amalgamation. There was an administrator in charge then until the end or September of 2017, and that was when the election was held for the new Dubbo Regional Council. Now, at the time, certainly part of the process that occurred during the amalgamation discussion was money was being offered from the state government of the day for councils to amalgamate, and there were various chunks of change put on the table, 5 million, 10 million, that type of money. So good chunks of change to help the amalgamation, help those councils get together. Now, councils didn't necessarily choose, and certainly Dubbo and Wellington didn't choose to go that way, but there was still money on offer. So in the 2017-18 financial year, we received $35 million, and I've rounded these to the nearest million just to make it easy. So $35 million. So that's a reasonable amount of money. That's for capital grants from state and federal. And again, I haven't actually investigated that one to the nth degree, but my guess there would be that there's probably more state than federal in that one because, again, that was around amalgamation.
Yep.
Next year, that dropped down to $28 million. And then the next year dropped down to $17 million.
Wow.
Now, I think probably part of that was the reputation of the council of the day was probably not great, and it was probably harder for them to be a functional council and put lots of applications in and be well regarded in the community to deliver those grants. So 35, 28, 17, and then it started to pick up 28, 29 and 30 over the last 3 years.
Okay. So things have started to move back in the right direction.
That's right. Now, there's a couple of issues there. One is there is a decision to be made to put in for a grant about whether or not you can afford to apply for the grant. And that sounds a bit silly because we want the money, put the grant application in. But it costs money in terms of staff time, and sometimes some of the reports you might need to satisfy the criteria in the grant. So you'll need certain case studies, or you might need certain investigations. You might need to deliver a BCR report, a benefit cost ratio report.
Right.
In the private world, I normally...
All of this takes time.
That's right. I normally hear that called an ROI report, return on investment. So the government might want various bits of information in that report. I've seen applications in the past where we've put an application in, we've been unsuccessful. We've talked to the government department in question. They said, well, you need to give us more information around this or more proof around that. So we've gone away. We've got consultants involved. We've spent some money to put that next application in, and typically we've been successful the second time around with that more information. But not always. So this is the problem. So you've got that. So again, if I just run through those, 35 million, 28 million, 17 million, 28, 29 and 30. When you consider all of that, the other part that's a challenge in that is budgeting. When you don't know how much you're going to get in the next financial year.
It's hard to forward plan.
Hard to forward plan when not only do you not know how much, but what projects you can do, because what amounts do we get in? Some of those projects won't go ahead if you don't get the money for them. It's not as if we'll have to find the money elsewhere. It's a simple, well, there's a project sitting on the shelf. It'll go ahead once we get the funding for that. So, and I know smaller councils, they talk to me in particular when we meet with some of the smaller councils in the area, that they say it costs us too much money to put those grant applications in. So we're just at the point now we'll just have to find the money elsewhere because you don't know the outcome. You don't know whether you're going to be successful.
Yep.
One of the things that I think, there's no doubt about it, that we'll have to do as a council, and we've started doing, and I think other councils will have to do it as well, is be more creative and innovative. And that's where I talked about that Squadron Energy example. Yep. We had a plan, a strategic plan, sitting on the shelf there, ready to go, which you've got to do for grants. You've got to have some plans, maybe some costings done, maybe even getting to the stage where you've got shovel-ready plans. That gets more expensive as well to sit on the shelf, but you've got to have some of these documents there ready to go. And when a grant program pops up, you don't always know when, suddenly, okay, there's that grant. We've got 2 months to get that in. You haven't got time to get all the plans ready, etc. You've got to have some on the shelf ready to go. And if you're doing your planning work correctly, then you should have some direction about where your council's going.
It's the importance then of the master plans. Like we've talked at length a number of times about council master plans. I'm imagining this must all link back in then to the reason why we do the master plans is because when the government funding does come around, we need to have an idea as to how we want to spend that money.
Yeah, spot on. So having master plans and having strategy. So in other words, councillors setting the strategy for council, where we're going, what are the things we're after, what's our strategy going forward. That strategy then says what master plans do we need to feed into that strategy. And then you might drill down a step further. We've got our master plan, but we might need some more specific plans, some more detailed plans that then feed into our master plan, that then feed into our strategy. So those plans are ready to go when something happens. And in the case of Squadron, we had a strategy to get to the stage where we know we've got approximately 4 gigalitres of water coming out of our sewage treatment plant each year. Is there some way we can take advantage of that water? At the moment, we grow a bit of lucerne, I think, maybe a bit of wheat, I'm not sure, but we've got a farm. We don't get too involved on a day-to-day basis with that, but we've got a farm that water goes to.
Experts, that's right.
So that strategy said we want to get to the stage where we take some of that 4 gigs of water and treat it to a high level where we could use it on some of our sporting fields. But there's no grant out there that we've seen that says take that treated effluent and treat it to a high level.
Yeah.
But when Squadron said we need to get some water, the simple answer we could have given Squadron was, sure thing, go out on the temporary water market and buy the 2 gigs of water that you need, the approximately 400 megs they need each year over 5 years. And I actually had a conversation with a water broker during the week, and I just said, so on the temporary market, what am I paying roughly over that? Now, of course, there's so many variables. Is it a dry year? Is it a wet year? Where are you buying it from? A whole range of variables there. But the number that we agreed upon, and when I say we agreed upon, I asked his advice and he told me a number, so I agreed with him, was about $700,000. So less than $1 million. And even in a dry year, he said, sure, that could push up to $1 million because water becomes more expensive when it's not much around. But he said probably $700,000 is what you'll be able to get that water for in round numbers. So Squadron could have gone and spent $700,000. We could have said to Squadron when they asked our advice, sure, go and find a water broker and get him to find some water for you. Keep in mind that if you do that, that 400 megs that you need is taken out of the farming environment because typically most of that water is used for farming, for various types of farming. So you're taking it out of the farming environment, using it for construction. So that doesn't seem like it's a great thing for the community.
Demand on a current supply sort of stuff is only going to make the actual supply lessen for others, isn't it?
Exactly right. So it might mean from a farming production, there might be less availability of various goods out there. So that doesn't sound great. So we had that conversation. We said, we've got a strategic document here that says we'd like our water treated to a higher level. So what about if you build or you pay for the build of a higher level treated effluent or advanced wastewater treatment facility, and then you've got the guarantee of water, because we know people are going to keep going to the toilet, having a shower, flushing their toilet, whatever. We know we're going to get approximately 4 gigs of water. In a dry year or a wet year, it might vary a little bit, but people are still using water around their household, which is where the water comes from to get to the sewage treatment plant. So if you've got that plant there, you're guaranteed that water, because if you pay for it, we're pretty happy to give you that water for the first 5 years, that 400 gigs that you might need for the first 5 years. We think that's a pretty good deal from our perspective, because we get effectively a $3.6 million facility for nothing, and Squadron get their guaranteed water. Sure, they're going to get it cheaper, but now they'll have that guaranteed water and they're paying it more.
Plus, it's not affecting the current supply.
Correct. That's exactly right. So this is the sort of thing now. That was essentially something that we were on the lookout for a government grant to get. But now we've said, here's another way to get that amount of money, $3.6 million. That doesn't fall off trees. That needs to come from somewhere. So we think this is a great solution, but it also opens your eyes to say, what other ways can we go out there and be innovative in the way we try and receive some grant money? And it's not a grant. This is a public-private partnership, so it's absolutely different to a grant, but it's the same outcome. It's money for the community that we didn't have to take out of ratepayers' money.
It's one of those sort of things, that public-private partnership idea. Are there any potential pitfalls, though, in going down that way?
Absolutely. And this is a thing that in my entire council career, first elected back in 2004, I've never seen us do a public-private partnership. And I know the general attitude of many councillors and even just the government in general. You say PPP, everyone gets a bit scared, because a PPP can be open to corruption. For example, why did we do this deal with Squadron, not with company ABC or company XYZ? What's going on here? Why didn't you open this up to the open market? Why didn't you tender on the open market for this? And the reality is, if we had to put this out to tender and said, we want someone to build a $3.6 million facility for us, and that'll give you about $700,000 worth of value, I don't know there's a lot of tenderers out there.
People with their hand up for it.
That's right.
But I can certainly see, though, that the reason why that would promote discussion in the community around that, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. So some people say then, what secret deal have you done with Squadron Energy? Well, we've done a deal. It's not secret. They've got guaranteed water, approximately 400 megs they'll need for the first 5 years for their projects they'll need.
Yeah.
They've got that guaranteed water. So it's not a secret deal.
Yeah.
It's a deal where, yes, they won't pay for that water. They just paid $3.6 million for a facility, so they won't pay for that water, which, again, I'm pretty comfortable with. I don't have an issue with that, and that's why I'm happy to talk about these numbers of $700,000, $3.6 million, to show that this is a deal where the community is gaining huge benefits. One of the problems with PPP is if there was a competitive environment out there, if lots of people wanted a certain amount of water and it was very cheap for us to produce it, then you would go out to a tender. But having said that, we've got 4 gigs coming out of our sewage treatment plant. If another proponent came along and said, we need construction water as well, what can we do? Can we do the same deal as Squadron? We'd say, absolutely. If we want to produce a gig, 1.5 gigs of water, absolutely, please come along. Not surprisingly, we haven't had our door knocked down from other proponents. And Squadron, in terms of the projects that they'll need this water for, there are 37 projects, you've heard me say before, across this area. I don't know any other individual proponent that would need the same volume of water as Squadron. So even if there was another company out there that wanted some water, they're probably just going to go out onto the temporary water market and buy that, because the volume of water that Squadron needs is more than any of the other proponents that I know of.
Okay.
So you've got a few things where it lines up, and it would have been laughable if we put out a tender for this, because, again, no one's going to put in a tender for that. It would have wasted a whole bunch of time. But remember that we had to go to the OLG, the Office of Local Government, and say, here's what we're proposing. Are you comfortable with that? And that's the point in time they could say no, or they could say, no, you've got to go through a different process. They've said, proceed, everything's fine at this stage. Now, it doesn't mean they've given it the stamp of approval to say, do whatever you want. They've said, proceed to the next step. So every step of the way, there's checks and balances in place.
So the Office of Local Government here would, if council chooses to do any more PPPs, you've always got to go through the OLG first. Is that right?
Absolutely right. So PPPs, you need to get permission from the Office of Local Government to keep proceeding. And there's different steps. They might say, oh, this is a much larger one, you need to go through a different process. With this one, they've actually said it's quite small in the scheme of things, so proceed as you were. But again, they'll want to look at it. We'll need to get permission from them as we go through the process.
But as you say, as funding gets tighter and applications become more complicated and more tedious possibly as well, and these sort of things, we have to get more creative. And potentially the whole idea of a PPP and it works in favour of all parties is potentially a way we could look down the future as well.
I just don't think we can keep doing things in the same old way. I think you've always got to be looking to innovate, always got to be looking to change, always got to be looking for those opportunities. Now, again, you've got to do those carefully, because it is public money we're talking about here and public assets. That water, that 4 gigs of water that comes out of the sewage treatment plant is a public asset. That water is not something that we can say, okay, good, we'll go and let some private company use that with no benefit to the public. It's a public asset. How do we use that in the best possible way?
Yeah, very good. Now, I saw that you're in Wellington during the week on one of your regional and regular visits there. Now, the playground's been fenced. The Duke of Wellington Bridge now has pedestrian access. Now, while you're awaiting results from that funding application to sort of see what else happens with that Duke of Wellington Bridge, what'd you find in your latest visit to Wellington this week? Give us a Wellington update.
Well, I do want to talk about the playground in particular, because I do want to get a bit of feedback from the community.
Yeah.
So I do go to Wellington regularly, and this particular week I was down. I met with the councillors. I try to have a one-on-one meeting with every councillor throughout the year, or throughout every month, sorry. But so I was down in Wellington meeting with the 2 Wellington councillors there, and I said, let's go and have a look at the playground, because this goes way back to 2021, to the previous council, where they had a resolution to get some community feedback on fencing the playground. There was a playground put in the middle of Cameron Park, and whether they wanted that fenced or not. And so we went through and carried out. That didn't happen in the last council, so we went through and took that on board, and we went and did a survey, and the feedback from the community was they did want that fenced. And there were different opinions there. Some people said, well, I'm at the playground, I'm watching my child, I don't need the playground fence because I can see them and I can do something about them if they decide they want to run out onto the highway. And the Mitchell Highway does go through the middle of Wellington, and the playground's fairly close to that. Other people said, absolutely, my 3-year-old is way too fast for me to catch up with them, so I definitely want that playground
look, I can
fenced.
remember my daughter in particular, she could outrun Usain Bolt, I reckon, when she was 2.
That's right. Over 20 metres.
Yeah, absolutely.
When there
I
was
couldn't
danger
catch up.
nearby.
That's right. Exactly.
So the community told us they wanted that fenced, and so we resolved to have that fenced, and that was all done. So the fencing's been put up there, and I had a couple of people in Wellington mention it to me, so I said, I'm down there catching up with our 2 Wellington councillors, Councillor Richard Ivey and Councillor Jess Goff. I said, we'll go and have a bit of a look at the fence. And we looked at the fence, and I must admit my first impression of it was it wasn't exactly what I'd imagined, because there's a fence that goes around most of the playground, but then beside that area there is a cafe, a building and a cafe there, and there's also the toilet block there in Cameron Park. So they've fenced the cafe and the toilet block in as part of that overall fencing.
Okay.
And I get why they've done that, because the fence itself to go exactly around the playground would be curved and it's a bit tricky to get around those spots, whereas the toilet block and the cafe building are both solid buildings and straight, so you can take a fence straight across to those, and then they effectively act as part of the fence in that area. Right. So we had a bit of a chat about it and said, well, I'm not sure that's exactly the way we would have done it as individuals, but I'm interested to hear what the community thinks about that. So certainly, and I've put a post on my social media as well, certainly give us some feedback. Tell us what you think about that fence, whether you would prefer it to be just around the playground or as it is now. And keep in mind that we're also doing some discussions or having some discussions around fixing the toilet there. As we know, we've talked about it before. There were lots of toilets there. Now there's not many. Bus operators don't like pulling up there because there's not enough toilets there. So we've got to fix that problem, and that fixing that problem may involve some changes in that area as well. So there might be a couple of issues there to change around, but I'd be interested in feedback from the community about whether they would like just the playground fence itself.
I read some of the feedback there. I was reading through that post during the week, and some of the comments were about the fact they felt that the fence, the height of the fence wasn't high enough. Did it meet all normal sort of restrictions in regards to guidelines, what was expected?
I don't think there's a problem with the height of the fence. It's not the same guidelines that you need around a pool fence, for example. Yeah. The fence is really designed to keep young people in, but if you're old enough to climb over the fence, the height it is there at the moment, you're probably okay. You probably understand what cars going on a highway means, and that means danger.
That was sort of my take on it as well. I'm thinking the fence is more sort of set up there for, as you say, the little toddlers, and it's not like they've got little stepping areas to get over the fence. If your little toddler can get over that fence, well, I'll tell you what, you've got problems.
You've got very talented.
That's the least of your issues.
That's right.
But
even if you saw a slightly older child climbing the fence, you'd probably be able to say, okay, there's taking a bit of time to climb over. You've got time to get up and say, Mary or Johnny, get back in from climbing over the fence. You've also got locks on the gates, obviously, and so if they're old enough to climb over the fence, they're probably old enough to reach up and undo the locks there.
Look, I've seen lots of, look, we all have. We've all seen plenty of those little public parks with the little toddler areas, and most of the fences seem to be about that height. So I don't necessarily know if that's a major issue.
Happy to take feedback again. That's the whole idea of this, is to get some feedback from the community. If the community thinks it does need to be higher, and we're not talking about a fence that would be around a school, for example. When fences were put in around schools, that really was to...
That's right, a whole different purpose.
Yeah, that's right. That was to keep older children in and maybe adults out potentially as well.
That's right, yes.
So they are designed
we refer to the undesirables in our community out at night time and stuff like that as well.
All those things. So they've got a different purpose. So I think the fence site seemed okay. It was more just the configuration. But again, if people think it needs to be different height, certainly give us your feedback around that. So I'll be interested in that. And then the Duke of Wellington. So we're waiting, hopefully, for about $21.6 million in some disaster recovery.
You're holding your breath on that one there, Matt, are you?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? That's $21.6 million, which is still public money. So it would come from the state government in disaster recovery money. That's $21.6 million that could be used in lots of different places. The state government's got to decide the best usage of that money, but we put an application in good faith to say this occurred as a result of a flooding event, and there are processes in place to get funding for that. Whether we get that or not, I can't tell you that answer. It's not my decision.
I suppose that the big question, if I'm state government and sort of putting on their hat for a second, the first thing I would be saying is this funding essential?
That's part of the decision they will have to make. All we can do is put the application in, put our best foot forward, and then cross our fingers. But in the meantime, we have spent a little bit of money. It was about $70,000 to get it to the point where It's got pedestrian access. So there's some bollards to stop people getting down there on, say, it would be tricky to get a motorbike through, for example, tricky to get something too large through, so you can walk through there. You could probably take a push bike slowly through, and then you go down to the bridge, and it's a little bit steep going down there, but again, that was just a walking path to access it.
Yep.
We've put some fencing up to stop people falling over the edge. There's normal fencing that was on the bridge previously, and we know we've had the bridge checked out from a structural perspective, so the flooding events didn't do any damage to the bridge. And keep in mind that where that bridge sits, it's near the entrance or near where the water comes down from the Macquarie River, but where the Bell River joins in there, the Bell River joins just after that. The damage that was done was more by the Bell River chewing out the corner.
Yeah.
So it's the approach. So there was a bitumen road there. The bitumen road is no longer, or parts of it are no longer there.
Yeah, gone.
So that's where the damage was done. But the fast flowing water from that Bell River turning around the corner there didn't impact the bridge.
Is there a chance that future flooding will turn around and destroy what's there right now?
Absolutely, in terms of the riverbank.
Yeah.
I think the bridge is still pretty good. The bridge was built knowing that it was going in the river. So obviously the engineers at the time would have built the structure to accommodate that.
Yeah.
But it's more that riverbank. Rivers will do what rivers will do. The water will go where it wants to flow. So where you have that Bell River there and that turning around the corner to go in, that was obviously where the damage was done. And I'm not an expert on this, but I have read some reports that talked about the fact that once the dam was put in and that changed the flow of the Macquarie River versus the Bell River, that added, I suppose, to the chewing away of that. But having said that, rivers chew away areas because that's what water does.
That's right. It's a natural erosion, isn't it, that happens,
Yeah, that's exactly right. You do get, effectively, that's what a river is, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
It's where water started running and then it's eroded to the point where it's
Exactly.
deep enough that you've got a river. So naturally you're going to get some of those erosions occur. What we would like to do is fill that area in where the corner is, fill that in, put enough...
Like a landfill type thing, is it?
Yeah, put some landfill in, but put enough structure around that it could withstand future flooding events because, surprise, surprise, we're going to get those.
That's going to happen again.
That's
Yes,
right. So
yes.
put that in so it's strong enough to withstand that. And then once that was built back in, we could then put a road back on top and then feed that access. But that's a maybe, that's a hopefully, that's
And that's a
relying on
$21
funding.
million project.
Correct. That's right. At the moment, though, at least you've got pedestrian access so people can walk down there, walk across. When I went and visited that, again, when I was in Wellington, went and did that and saw a couple of people walk across there in the short time I was there. So people are using
That's
it.
good.
And then on the other side, on the Dubbo side of the river, if you like, then everything seems to be okay there. So that entrance that was there was fine because the water wasn't chewing away the riverbank there.
Yeah.
So at least you've got the access there to
Yeah.
both those two areas
Yeah,
there
that's
now. But again, I'm really after that feedback in particular. Feedback on the bridge as well, that's fine, but in particular on the playground.
Yeah. Now, there's some questions at the last council meeting about your radio interviews with 2BS in Bathurst and 2WEB in Burke. A lot of that commentary about that was probably about why you're speaking to these radio stations, these particular areas. So I suppose that the point would be, and the question in regards to that, why do you do all these interviews with the different radio stations? Is there a particular point of focus and reason why you feel as though it's important to do that?
Well, there is the little part of the Local Government Act that talks about the role of the mayor, so I'll mention that, but I'll get into the more specifics around those. So if, and you know I love quoting the Local Government Act, so if you go to Section 226...
I know it's your favourite bedtime reading.
It is, actually, it is. Section 226, Part C of the Local Government Act 1993.
You just pulled that one straight out, did you?
Just off the top of my head.
Just top of your head, well done.
Because people do ask me about it often. It talks about, Section 226 in general talks about the role of the mayor and talks about a whole range of areas there. Subsection C says the role of the mayor is to be the principal member and spokesperson of the governing body, including representing the views of the council. Now, I'll paraphrase that slightly to not bore our listeners, but the whole idea here is there's a couple of things that are important in there. The spokesperson of the governing body, so decisions that we make as council, the official spokesperson of the council is the mayor. That's written in the Local Government Act. It's not me saying, oh, I'm so important, you must talk to me, or my ego's so big, you must talk to me. The Local Government Act says the spokesperson, because you want one spokesperson. You don't want 15, 20. You don't want 100 spokespeople because they may not all agree in what they're all saying.
One voice, one message, so to speak.
That's right. And that's keeping in mind, that's the views of the councils. That's when a decision's made. So before a decision's made, take the sale yards, councils are out there talking about their different views, different opinions. That's all fine. Once the decision's made, now the decision is that we will retain it internally, then that's what councillors should say, and that's definitely what I'll say, regardless of my opinion. It's irrelevant then. The decision has been made by the council. So that's important to know, that it's the views of the council being represented by the spokesperson. And the spokesperson, and I take that part very seriously, my job is to communicate. My job is to be out there being the spokesperson for council. The last thing you want in a mayor, according to the Local Government Act, is a shrinking violet that says, I don't want to do any interviews, I don't want to talk to anyone, I don't want to have radio interviews. You want a mayor that is out there speaking on a regular basis, good, bad or indifferent.
Yep.
It's the message. And exactly as we do on this podcast, we talk about a whole range of topics. It's about communicating. So the typical sort of week for me, I have a number of regular radio interviews booked in. Depending whether it's a council meeting week or a committee meeting week or not, it's typically 4 to 6 radio interviews that are booked in every week. So they're just booked in. Yes, I've got those set times. I have those interviews with those various radio stations. Then you get the ad hoc ones as well. There's something that pops up, some different thing that comes along. So you'll do an ad hoc interview here and there. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. TV is a bit different. TV is very much ad hoc. There's no regular TV spots, but again, they're a bit different because it is really just news. You're appearing in the news. So one week you might do none. Next week you might do 3. It varies depending on what's on. And then newspaper, I've got a newspaper column each week, my mayoral memo, which you often bring up.
I do.
And then you've got various interviews. It's unusual not to have minimum of, say, 2 phone calls from local newspapers for some topic, for some comment, for some things. And they don't always appear in the paper because sometimes you're not giving them the opinion they want to hear. So you don't end up with your opinion being used. And then you've also got other radio stations, other news outlets, other ones that appear from time to time ad hoc. The bottom line is, with those 2 that were asked about, 2BS and 2WEB, one's in Bathurst, one's in Burke.
Yep.
And why are you doing interviews with those organisations outside those? It says to me, and I didn't approach those, all of these different radio stations are ones that have said, can we do interviews with you? Can we lock something in, et cetera, et cetera. With those 2 in particular, I got phone calls from both those 2 once I came back on as mayor and said, can you do those interviews? 2WEB and Burke said, we've got a big listening area, and that listening area in the whole western area of New South Wales use Dubbo as a service centre. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
They've got familiarity with Dubbo, and they're interested in what's happening in Dubbo. So absolutely, 2BS in Bathurst, I think, was really just along the lines of, Bathurst is a similar city to Dubbo. We have similar things that happen. It'd be interesting to know what's going on. And Kerry Peck is the interviewer, the host that I normally do those interviews with, and he starts off just about every time we do an interview with, I'm a bit of a sticky beak. I like to know what's going on around the area. Yep. So now I'm going to go and talk to the Dubbo mayor. And that's fine.
That's part of the reason why we watch the local and national news, to be honest.
To find out
what's going on around the rest of the world and around the rest of the region.
Yeah, that's right. So he finds it of value.
Yep.
It's certainly not something that I've pushed. I've not certainly said, right, Kerry, we've got to do more of these interviews. If you're happy to do them on a regular basis, I'm happy to be part of that in terms of the communication of that.
Let me pick up also the fact that it's, to me also, I listen to what you're saying, and it's spot on, because if anyone's sitting there thinking that decisions made at a council level just affect people here in Dubbo, you're wrong. There's so much of the stuff that happens out there that is actually affected in a broader perspective. And other people, as you say, out there are very much interested in what's happening here at our regional level. I was in Sydney during the week, and I was down there, and I was at a party. It was my one of my niece's 18th. And so we're down there and having a great time, and went across and started to chat to these guys. And they said, where are you from? I said, I'm from Dubbo. Oh, Dubbo. Oh, wow. It's great to hear the fact that the sale yards are back in the hands of the council. Yeah, that's really good. Oh, really pleased to hear about that. How good's that? And I said, oh, okay. It's great to hear you got interest in the Dubbo sale yards. I said, where are you from? Oh, yeah, we're from up Glen Innes Way. I said, we're a couple of farmers from up Glen Innes Way, and we've been following it really, really closely. There's a classic example as the reasons why getting out there and going on the radios and other sort of places around. There's a lot more interest out there than just simply here in Dubbo. You know, and the impact of what happens at council is not just being affected here at a local level; it's affected at a much broader level as well. So having that one voice out there, getting the right story out there, is very important from the Dubbo perspective and also from a New South Wales and Australian perspective.
Yeah, that's spot on. And it's interesting to hear that feedback where people are interested in what was happening here in Dubbo in a whole range of different areas. But again, that's part of my job. Certainly not the only part of my job, but an important part of my job is to communicate. And you've heard me say it before, I take that seriously. And we started this podcast so that I can keep communicating in different ways. And
That's right.
this was really started on the back of a number of the radio interviews I did. And I had people give me some feedback where they said, I heard you talking on the radio today about whatever it was, the sale yards, for example, whatever it might have been. And I would like to know more about that. Now, on radio, most of the interviews I do vary from, say, 6 minutes to 12 minutes, because that's typically, they've got a radio station to run, they've got advertisers to look after. I do stuff in the ABC, so they're not always advertised, but you've got other
set
segments.
Time frame.
Yeah, you've got a set time frame, and you can't drill down in great detail about all those different topics. So with the podcast, the beauty is we don't have advertisers, we don't have set time frames. We can talk about it at length and get full information out there. And so I think that's good. But again, I'll keep doing this, and for no other reason than the Local Government Act Section 226 Part C says that's my job to go out there and be the spokesperson for council.
Oh, good on you. Now, I remember some time ago, Council secured $403,000 approximately from the New South Wales Government for the design and construction of new toilets in Victoria Park. Now, Council currently is asking for feedback on the location and design of these toilets. So I suppose a couple of little things. First of all, how do residents add their voice to this and their thoughts in regards to how they'd like to see the construction take place?
Well, I'd like to make a point here, a valid point, that there is a process to go through. We've talked about it before, about Your Say. So the whole idea of Your Say on our site is so that people can give feedback from the community. And I'd encourage people to do that. So if I get down into the nitty-gritty of this in particular, so you're quite correct, $403,000, $486 so was the amount that we got from the New South Wales Government. That was announced previously to do new toilets in Victoria Park. Now, you may be familiar with the toilets in Victoria Park. They're kind of
they're
tucked
pretty
away.
old, aren't they?
Yeah, 1975.
There
they
you
were
go.
built, so they're pretty old. And they're tucked away down the back there. So we want to know from the community whether we think that's the best location, or we've got two other suggested locations, but any location could be suggested. We've got a location near the playground that's just on the side, on the southern side of the pool, or maybe out the front of the pool area there. So we've got those three locations, and then we've got different questions in a survey. Now, what I have seen when information was posted about this on my social media, on council social media, people putting various comments and putting their feedback on that. And so I want to make it very clear to people that we'll have all this information from Your Say, from our survey, feed through into a report that will end up in council. I can guarantee that all of those social media comments will not be part of that report. Our staff do not have the time to go through and look at every social media site out there and get all the various comments and then gather all those into something meaningful they can put into a report. The reason we've got the survey there is because we want to hear from the community, but we want to hear from the community in the most efficient way. It doesn't take long. I went and had a look at the survey just to see what it looked like. It doesn't take long. There's not many questions there. It's pretty easy to go through and fill it in. So I'd encourage anyone that's got an opinion on that, whatever that opinion might be, fill in the survey, give us information back. That won't be the only reasons we make the decision. There'll be a whole range of other things that feed into councillors in terms of deciding what that final toilet is, where it is, how it looks, all the rest of that. But there's no doubt about it that community feedback is very important in the process. It's not the only thing, but it's very important. So please do that. But the reality is social media is a great way if you want to vent, if you want to take some pot shots at council, if that's your objective, go for it. Knock yourself out. But if you actually want your voice to be heard, if you seriously want to put some commentary in to make or help make the decision making around that, go to the survey.
Can I also say that the word constructive?
Absolutely.
You know, like as you say, if you just want to have a vent in that, we'll save it for other platforms. But from the point of view, if you want to get out there and actually offer some constructive advice, some constructive opinion, whatever the case may be, go through the Your Say website.
Yeah, that's right.
Because, as you say, the whole point of this is that you get a chance to have your say so people can look at it and read it through and go, actually, that's a great idea. You know, I never thought of that. Or, oh, yeah, that's not a bad way of doing it. Or, actually, I've raised a really good point in regards to it. If you're just going to sit there and vent, don't bother. Because, honestly, they're the sort of comments which, if I'm the person sitting there reading through that Your Say stuff and someone wants to have a bit of a vent, I'll skip it. I'll go straight to the next one. I wouldn't even take my time to bother reading a vent. But if it's simply someone sitting there with constructive advice, I'll be going, hey, this is good.
And I'm sure our staff do read all of those. But if you go into Your Say and
they're a lot more patient than me from the sound of things.
But if people vent in there, they'll still take that. And that'll still feature in the report that goes through to council. But again, keep in mind that saying things on social media, and this is, I suppose, in general, probably doesn't get you an outcome. It gets you the ability to vent or, again, take pot shots at council. So keep in mind, that's, and some people have said, is that expensive? $403,486 over $400,000. That expensive for that toilet? Well, that's the amount the New South Wales government gave us to do that, and we can't take that. Some people have said, "I just build some cheaper toilets and put that into some potholes somewhere." You can't do that with grants. When you get grants,
very specific.
That's right.
That's what it's actually there for.
Yeah.
And I did read a few comments about that. Just retile it up or whatever the case be, and put the money somewhere else. And it's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
It gets to the stage with some of our facilities that the maintenance becomes an incredibly expensive part of the process. So by replacing it, you're actually saving money long term rather than continue to maintain it. So if you spend a bit of money on it and tidy up a little bit, then you still have the maintenance issues often. And so replacing it is, and you do get to the end of life of a building, but replacing it makes sense. So that's money from the state government, over $400,000 from the state government to replace the toilet. So fantastic. Get your feedback on that. That's open till the 29th of July.
I have to ask the question, is a 3D printed toilet on the table potentially for this?
Absolutely. There's no reason that a 3D printed toilet wouldn't be an option of all the options available. There are different options where you can have a prefab toilet built. You can have that toilet at the moment is a brick toilet, so built in a normal construction where you're laying bricks. But now you can get toilets that are prefabricated. You get toilets that are corrugated iron. You can get toilets that are 3D printed. So everything is on the table. That's about the actual doing the construction method. The survey is more about
design.
Well, yeah, some
And
basic
position,
steps
location.
of design and the location. The location is probably the biggest one there.
Yeah.
Is it better to be tucked away down where it is? Is it better to be, do you want it right in front of the pool? Is it better to be right there? So there's a range of questions if you go through and look at the survey there. But absolutely, there's no reason that 3D printing isn't one of the many options available to us to build any facility.
Well, based on previous experience of what happens around here with toilets, I'm expecting to see quite a few people put their comments in for the say with this one.
Well, it's funny, with toilets, we've got the 3D printed toilet, which has created a little bit of commentary.
Yes.
Some fantastic, some not so fantastic, but it's certainly raised the toilet conversation around the community. Then we've got this, over $400,000 for this toilet and some discussion around that. And in our budget, when we put our $180 million budget through council meeting at our last council meeting a week and a half ago, then the things that were changed in that budget, two of those related to toilets. One was fixing up the Cameron Park toilets where we just don't have enough access for those and the changes that were made during the last council, fixing up the problems that were created there. And then another part was putting some toilets in some cemeteries. So there seems to be a toilet focus at the moment on this particular council.
That's exactly right, yes. Now, I saw this again raised a little bit of discussion during the week. There were a couple of changes to waste services that were announced during the week. I think we need to sort of talk through these, Matt. What's happening here in regards to the changes to waste service and why were they implemented?
Obviously, what you want from your council, from any organisation, is to keep reviewing what you're doing, keep improving it. You don't want to leave things the same as they were. And the bulky waste has been popular, but certainly there have been some minor issues with it. Some people were concerned that during the bulky waste period, people didn't look when their area was being picked up. And they didn't want to miss out, so they put their stuff out well in advance.
I've seen plenty of examples of that, and I've been subject to it myself, to be honest, where there's times where I've looked across the road and saw the neighbours had his stuff out and thought, oh, gee whiz, I better get myself organised. I'll get it out, and it's still sitting there 3 weeks later.
Yeah, that's right. Because people don't necessarily look at it and they don't want to miss out.
No, that's
so
right.
it becomes a bit untidy around Dubbo. And some people have said one person's trash is another person's treasure, so people go around and look at some of that stuff and go through it. And they do that, and I think that's fine as long as they leave it in a fairly orderly fashion at the end of all that.
It doesn't always happen.
Doesn't always happen, that's right. So it became a bit of a dumbing ground. But the other bit of feedback I received, and certainly council received, was, I missed it. I was away that time, or I just missed out, didn't realise it had been picked up. Can I get them to come back and do mine? And of course, no, because that's right, you missed the opportunity.
Expired.
But we'll do it again another year. So is that okay? And of course, then people aren't very happy about that. But we do pay for this service. So there's a cost to the community, cost to the ratepayer for this ultimately. And we're happy to do it for that once, but we can't be having people go back and do it multiple times. So there are some councils, and again, our staff look at different councils around the state and see how they're doing different things. So some councils have changed to the process where you do a booking service so that you can do it multiple times throughout the year. So you've got multiple opportunities. You can actually ring up and book the service and say, when you're doing this area, can you come along and do mine? So you've got multiple chances throughout the year. So if you missed one, you don't have to say, oh, that's never got to wait a year. You've got a chance again to do it. Now, you still only get the one opportunity through the year. So again, from a cost perspective, from council, we're actually, in terms of our contract that we use to do that, there's no extra cost to council. You'll still get that one pickup, but you'll be able to choose. So I'm still entitled
to that one bulky pickup a year, but I've got now more opportunities to choose when I put my stuff out for that bulky pickup.
Correct, that's right. And you'll book it so you'll know more accurately when it is. So you'll actually ring or you'll go online and you'll book that. You'll go into the council chamber if you want and you'll book that in. Right. All right, I know it's coming in that week, so I can put my stuff out that week, not, oh, my neighbour's got it out, put it out 3 weeks in advance.
So there's something online there, like a bulky waste pickup thing or whatever.
Correct, that's right. Go do it online, as say phone call or physically go in there. And so the rules haven't changed. The whole idea is that it's meant to be basically one box trailer load or 1 cubic metre, something that would be no heavier than can be lifted by, say, a couple of people. So there's still some limits around those. Things that typically go out there, mattresses, green waste, some smaller white goods, e-waste, push bikes, that type of thing, general bulky waste, so furniture, that type of thing. You replace the lounge, and what am I going to do with this old lounge? You can put that out.
My son's already finished his university lounge. He doesn't need it anymore, that sort of thing, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So you shouldn't put out things that are, say, large fridges that are more than 30 kilograms. That probably shouldn't be put out there. Rocks and soil, again, if it's over 30 kilos, so they shouldn't be put out there. Asbestos, obviously not. Definitely there's a process to get rid of asbestos. You want to have some professionals in to do that, and you want to take it.
You don't want to be touching it anyway.
You don't want to be touching it, and you want to take it out to the tip and identify as asbestos when you go there. Concrete, so if you've broken up a path somewhere and you've got big chunks of concrete, again, it's about that weight of that. So rather than go through all those various details, then if you keep that idea of that one box trailer load or 1 cubic metre or something can be lifted by 2 people. So those rules are all still the same. It's just the flexibility. So we think this will give people more flexibility in how they do it. Now, at this stage, it's one a year, but this is a 12-month trial. If this goes according to plan and people are comfortable with that, the idea at some point in the future will be that you'll be able to do extra bookings on a paid-for service. So you do it once. Yes, that's done for free. Fantastic. And now, I wouldn't mind getting that done again. I can ring up and book. I've had my one this year, but I'm happy to pay. I can't tell you what that will be because that's still all to be decided. But essentially, that's where we're headed with this to get to that point in time where you'll be able to do that.
So sort of in the old days, you probably get a big skip bin or something and throw it in. But now the option is potentially going to be available through council.
That's right. Now, that's again, no council decision being made on that at this stage. It's a 12-month trial. Book it in, you'll get your one a year. And all urban residents who receive the 2 or 3 bin curbside collection are eligible for this. So that's one part of it. The other part of the change is the voucher concept. So you get one drop off at the tip each year for people that are in the urban area. So basically people, again, they get the 2 or 3 bin curbside collection. You're allowed one visit to a council waste facility, to a transfer station if you're near one of those, or to the Wallandra Waste Depot if you're in Dubbo, for example. In the past, you used to flash your driver's licence and that was about it. And we've found that there was not a great system there. There's probably a bit of fraud, a bit of abuse of the system. So we've changed that now to a voucher system, and you'll go online, you'll go to council, and you'll basically prove that you're a resident, and then you'll get a voucher as part of that process. So the rules are the same, just the method of application is different. So
and again, you simply go through the online process to access
process,
this. And what is it, like a download of a voucher sort of thing?
Something like that, and or you can go physically into the council and ask them, or ring up. So some people have said they haven't got internet access. Sure, go in the council and say, I don't have internet, and they'll help you out through that process, or ring up. But essentially there'll be a voucher process, an online voucher process. That's the idea, is to make it better. And some people have said, well, this is just a cost-saving exercise from council. Yes. Hello.
Is there a problem with that? Or
That's right. It's community money we've got here. Yeah. And if we can be more efficient with the use of that community money, that's better. That's more money we've got to fill potholes in, or more money we've got for other services. So if we can be more efficient, that's what we're looking at all the time. We've already had a discussion on this podcast about the lack of grant funding, or how hard it is to get grant funding, etc. So if we can make our operations more efficient in what we do, then absolutely, shouldn't we be doing that?
Absolutely. Well, look, a lot of the negative commentary I see at times around council is the fact that they're not efficient enough. So this is one of those moments councils may be trying to be efficient, but still getting criticised. So
That's right.
damned if you do or damned if you don't.
It almost seems like you can't win, doesn't it?
No, exactly right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I do read some comments sometimes where people say, this is just a cost-saving exercise, or this is council saving money. And you go, well, yes, that's it. But it's your money. We're saving your money. It's not
That's right.
It's not council money per se. It's your money we're saving in this process, which again, you would want that from any organisation.
Absolutely. Now we talked about this end of last week there, at the end of the last week's podcast, the fact you were going to be in Canberra during the week. You went down to the chilly little capital. I'm pretty sure you would have been nice and frozen down there because looking at some of those temperatures, it looked very, very cold. Now, you attended several combined conferences. Whenever a council attends a conference, I see the word junket thrown around, and quite often that becomes the case. Very easy. It's off again, another junket, this time around the frozen capital of Canberra. For a start, is there any imperative to attend the variety of conferences that relate to local government? In other words, is it important that you have to be at all these conferences?
Well, there's a few reasons I would say yes, and there's a limit. There would be a conference every week that myself or councillors could go to. There's no doubt about it. There's no lack of conferences in local government, and they've got a different focus on some of them, or they've got different objectives they're trying to achieve. So the first thing I'd turn to would be the Local Government Act.
A little bedside reading gets another bit of a workout.
That's right.
There
so
it is.
Again, if I go back to Section 226, the role of the Mayor, which is my Bible, if you like, my gospel there, and this time I'll quote Part M, and I'll paraphrase that, and it says, the role of the Mayor is to represent the council at intergovernmental forums at regional, state and Commonwealth level. And we see that with things like the Alliance of Western Councils, so all the councils around this area. There is an alliance. We have quarterly meetings on that. I go along and attend those. There are things like Regional Cities New South Wales. I'm the chairperson of that, but if I wasn't the chairperson, I'd still go along because that's a meeting of regional councils, regional cities. You've got country mayors. I go along and attend country mayors. So you do have different things you attend. And these forums here, these three conferences that end up being combined into one, definitely, I think, well, again, Local Government Act says you should be doing that. Yeah. But more to the point, I think what you find, and I encourage councillors to do the same, there are conferences and there are different congresses and forums to attend. You want your councillors to be learning more, to be educating themselves. If you've got an employee in an organisation, you would typically go along to some different events throughout the year, whether it be training sessions where people might come in and give you training on new products, or you might go and attend some sort of industry forum or industry training session. Maybe not every employee, maybe the manager does that, but you want those people to be trained up to be better at what they do.
Education's a lifelong process. It's all about the upskilling all the time. We are in a changing modern world. We've talked here about the changing nature already in regards to grant processes and how more difficult they're becoming. You have to attend these conferences to be up to speed on what's happening, what the changes are.
We'll look at education. You're from an education background, and again, teachers would do in-services or teachers would attend different things.
Every week people are often in services.
And if you took your child along to a school and a teacher stood there and said, well, I've got my degree, I'm a teacher, I'm never going to attend any of those updates, any of those forums, any of those in-services because I've got my degree, that's it, that's all I need to know. You'd be saying, do I really want my child in a class where someone's going to close themselves off?
That level of arrogance ain't going to get you very far, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's right. And there is so much we can learn as councillors, so much we can learn from other councils, so much we can learn when we attend forums, listen to speakers, listen to various government people, whatever it might be. Absolutely. So, yes, within reason, I would say there is an imperative to attend these, but this particular one, these three forums were some of the bigger ones. So, yeah, absolutely. Just on that question alone, I suppose, to finish off on that question, yes, I think it's worthwhile to attend these, and I think councillors in general should be looking to do something throughout the year. I think most councillors do something throughout the year to help their education and to learn and just to share various ideas.
Absolutely. Now, further to this question in regards to the whole nature of the conferences, and let's talk about the conferences. What did you go to, and what were some of the main points of focus?
So there used to be a thing called the NGA, National General Assembly. This was an assembly that was held in Canberra, and I love how local government in particular seems to call conferences different names. You go to a congress, or you go to an assembly, or you go to a forum. They're just conferences. Okay?
They're all conferences.
That's right.
End of the day, we're sitting in conference.
That's right. Exactly right. I don't know that I've picked anything that goes, oh, this is definitely a congress rather than a conference. So in this particular example, there was NGA. I remember going to NGAs many, many years ago, and they were typically a 2-day conference or a 2-day assembly. And so that was good. You were in Canberra. Typically you'd get a couple of the ministers who would come along and do some presentations. There was a range of discussions. I'll talk about something that's peculiar to local government conferences I've never seen anywhere else in a moment. But then it grew a little bit from that, and there was a focus on regional. So you've got 537 councils in the nation, and they would all assemble at the assembly. And sometimes you would find that there was a bit of a focus on some city-centric components, and maybe regional people felt like they were being left out a little bit. So then the day before the National General Assembly, they started a process where there was a regional forum, and that was a group session to begin with where regional councils would come along, and then you'd break out in some different little breakout groups.
So that's a good idea, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you're in
If you're
Canberra
going to be down
anyway.
there, you may as well sort of try to maximise the time.
Can we extend it out?
Yeah,
Can we
yeah.
do some extra things there? And so then on the back of that,
Right.
when this new federal government was elected, there are two ministers for local government. I don't quite understand how this works, but you've got Catherine King, Minister for Local Government, and you've got Christy McBain, Minister for Local Government. Now, we tend to deal with Christy McBain. It would, and I don't know if this is correct, and my apologies to Christy if it's not, but it almost seems like Christy is the junior Minister for Local Government and Catherine is the senior Minister for Local
Yet
Government.
they both hold the same title.
Well, it seems to be. I can't see any difference how in terms of the wording of the title they hold, but we tend to be more involved with Christy. We do certainly, I'm not saying anything bad about Catherine here. We do get an opportunity to meet with Catherine, but Christy seems to be very involved at a very personal level. With, obviously, phone calls from Christy, for example. Hi, Christy. Is this really Christy on the phone just ringing me around? I'm just asking about something that might be happening in Dubbo.
Yeah.
So
Sounds like she's more hands-on, so to speak.
absolutely right. And she's a former mayor, so she's got experience from a local government perspective, and certainly from the minister's perspective, very good. But I think Christy, and certainly Catherine as well, have pushed the local government message in the federal government sphere. And so they've come back. There used to be this thing called the Australian Council of Local Government. So they've rejuvenated this. And so now at the end of the National General Assembly, we have another day added on,
Right.
which is the Australian Council of Local Government. And that's really heavily focused on ministers or senior government personnel coming on and basically talking to us in panel type scenarios.
right.
Yeah. So now what used to be a 2-day conference has grown into a 4-day conference.
It's been quite an extended sort of form there to be in Canberra. They obviously want to keep advertising Canberra in the middle of winter as well, to get people down there.
What a wrong time to do it. Obviously, they do it when there's a sitting week on, but there are sitting weeks throughout the year. It's not the only sitting week now.
You know, spring's a nice time in Canberra.
I would think that'd be much nicer because it was cold this week.
Freezing. Hey, tell me, now I know that one of the things that we talked about briefly there at the end of the last podcast was in regards to that there was a motion you were going to put forward. Was that at the conference part?
Yeah, so that was at the National General Assembly. So I'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
And one thing that's a bit different about a local government conference, and not everyone, but for example, at the Local Government New South Wales conference, the same thing happens. I remember the first one I attended of those, I've gone, what is this? Because it started out like a normal conference. I've been to conferences all around the world for many years. And you have some expert presenters who'll come along, maybe a keynote, for example. You'll hear from some of the staff from this organisation, and then you might have some panel sessions. They seem pretty popular, a few people on the panel, a few questions from the audience, and that seems to be the way it flows. And then a very valuable part of a conference is the morning tea break and the lunch break, where you get to just have a bit of a talk to people. And what about that conference? Sometimes it'll be a bit of a discussion. What about that conference speaker, that keynote? What did you think of that? And so it generates some conversation. But then it got to this idea at this first conference I went to way back in the mid-2000s, early 2000s, where they then had debate like a council meeting. But a council meeting...
570-odd delegates.
Well, you can just imagine, can't you? So you take a normal council meeting that might have 11, 13 councillors and one mayor chairing it. You've got then the president of the Local Government Association, whether it be state or the federal one, who is basically chairing a meeting, as you said, with a room full, literally a room full, so 500, 600 delegates there.
Jeez.
And each council gets allocated a certain number of voting delegates. So you have to vote on that at council to say who your voting delegates are, and they might be more voting delegates from certain size councils. But even it's bare minimum. At the state government level, 128 councils. Back those first ones I would have attended, there would have been over 150 councils. So you can imagine at least 150 delegates in the room, and then the debate. So there's a motion put forward, and different councils bring forward their motions. Then they debate those motions. So you can imagine.
Sounds like it'd be easier to probably try to round up some cats or something there to get agreement on all this.
And then you do all that, and then there's a vote on those. Sometimes it's pretty obvious, all those in favour, and there's a lot of hands go up against, a few hands go up, and the president sitting there at the front can go, yep, I can see that's lost or carried. But sometimes it's a bit tight there. We're going to do a count. And literally put your hand up if you're in favour.
Is that right?
So you hold your hand up, and you've got to hold your voting card up to show that you're not just a random.
Yeah.
And then someone will go around and count, and then against count. Oh, that was 120 to 57 or whatever.
Yep.
But they've gone a bit more advanced than that now. We've got electronic voting devices.
Oh, okay, yep.
So now if they say we need a count, you've got 10 seconds to press yes or no on your device, and you press that, and then the score comes up on screen.
Right.
So it's much more efficient now.
You get some dramatic music playing in the background sort of thing while you're doing it?
It was funny because at the state government ones, there is a little bit of voting music. There's some little elevator type music. And at the federal one this time, there was no music, and the president sitting there going, oh, we need a music. Do I need to start tapping out a song or something while the 10 seconds is going? So you've got this debate concept where you've got a number of motions that are brought forward and debated, and you can imagine there's a fair bit of debate that goes. And one thing, and maybe this is why they started the regional forum, one thing that I find interesting is that sometimes the debate goes along city versus country lines.
Yeah, okay.
Someone will stand up from very much one of the inner Sydney council areas, for example, and they'll put their points of view forward, and you can hear a few rumblings around the room, and there'll be someone who will stand up and put very much a view from a Burke or a Brewarrina sort of focus, and then a few rumblings from the other people in the audience there, and ultimately you have a vote to decide which way it goes. Now, what happens with those? What's the point of those? With a council meeting, we know that's in a resolution of council. It must be taken forward by the staff to implement whatever that resolution was. In these, typically what happens is these will then form policy so that the state or the federal association can go to the government of the day and say, our members have voted on this, and this is the policy that's been formed on the back of that.
These are the representatives of our constituents. What they want is this. You couldn't get a more powerful body than that from the point of view of giving advice to a government base.
That's exactly right. And so you will still have the board of that organisation. Sometimes they'll have to formulate the exact policy out of that, but at least they know the direction they want to be taken by the group, if you like, by the assembly, by the conference. So that's always interesting, without a doubt. And yes, Dubbo Regional Council did put a motion forward, and it was actually on the back of a meeting that we had with Chris Bowen's office. The CEO, Murray Wood, and myself were down in Chris Bowen's office talking to some of the staff down there very early on in the year, and we put forward the issue that we've got to have all these individual voluntary planning agreement discussions with all of these 37 proponents. And yes, we love the money we get out of them, but it's hard work when it's not compulsory. It's hard work when there's no set standards. We've created a set standard, which we've shared with lots of other councils, so that seems to be working quite well. But really, should it be up to one council to do that?
Which we've had many discussions about in the podcast.
And the problem is that the federal government is not the consent authority. The state governments are. But I think there's a role there for the federal government to play, whether it be putting some guidelines in place, whether it be having some sort of standards they would ask the various state governments to align themselves with. So there was some sort of standard across the state. So we put forward a resolution to say that we'd like the Ministerial Council, the I suppose body there for climate change, energy and climate change, Ministerial Council, to put forward a view that this should be the compulsory standard across the entire nation, which then state governments could use as part of their planning process.
Great idea.
Yeah, that was. So that was debated zero at the council, because at the assembly, because what happens is the president will say, okay, we've got the next motion 130.2, put forward by Dubbo Regional Council, that be moved. So I jump up to a microphone and say, yes, moved by Dubbo Regional Council. Someone seconded that. In this case, Warren Shire Council seconded that. I don't think there's going to be much discussion about someone seconding it. There was always going to be some support there for that. And then to try and make the process more efficient, normally at a council meeting, I would say, Councillor Barnes, you've moved that. Would you like to speak to your motion? And you would speak and put forward the views about that particular motion, and then any other speakers against, etc. For the sake of efficiency, the mover doesn't actually get to speak to their motion unless there's some opposition. In other words, if it looks like it's going to be unanimous, why bother about wasting the time? when you've got all these motions to go through in a big audience.
Yeah, yeah.
So the question was asked by the President, any opposition to this motion at all?
Crickets.
Crickets, that's right. So I didn't need to speak to it. I was there at the microphone ready to go,
Yep.
had all my thoughts ready to go, doesn't matter. So no opposition, I declare that motion carried. So unanimously,
Fantastic.
the Assembly thought this was a good idea, which it seems pretty obvious
Yep.
about that. And I did actually speak to Chris Bowen about the fact that had gone through, and again, hopefully that'll help us move forward with that. But ultimately, that's a good resolution from our council taken forward that now will form part of the policy of the National General Assembly.
That's fantastic. And that's now going to go. So federal government now, hopefully, will create some policy on that, which they can then feed on then and speak to their state counterparts and to put into law from a state level. Is that pretty much the aim of the game?
Within the next 10 years.
Within the next year,
So,
that's right.
so that's part of the problem. When you
We're
do,
not holding your breath on things.
that's right. When you do something like that, that can create the policy of the Australian Local Government Association, and then that policy can be pushed forward to the government of the day, and then they can say, yeah, we've heard you and we don't agree, we've heard you, yes, we'll do something about it, but that'll take time, and then if they did that, then it would come down to the state governments implementing
You
that.
know what? Hopefully in the environment right now, within this, because there's so much still discussion, debate in regards to what's happening with the environment, you'd like to think the fact that the federal government's going to take this on board pretty seriously. And see the fact that, yes, this is how do we get people to buy into this in a more positive way? Well, this is something we can do. This is a great initiative that's come forward here by the council. Let's bring this forward as an idea, bring it to the states and say, hey, listen, guys, we've got to do something about this. The council out there are struggling. They find this really hard to get something on board from the point of view of, having the different industry groups sort of pay a certain amount of figure, whatever the money could be. I really hope it goes through faster than 10 years, to be honest. Let's hope it goes through within 6 months or so.
Maybe I'm being a bit cynical.
Yeah. All right, so we talked there very briefly in regards to sort of some of the nature of some of the conferences, but there must have been some highlights there for you. So what were some of the highlights of the conferences?
It's actually interesting. There's so many different parts. It's a lot of conferencing, if you like. So
Yes.
a lot of different discussions. Some of those highlights are around the discussions you have with other councillors and other groups that you might talk to. Some of them are just sitting back listening. So I'll try and pull out a few highlights there. It was interesting. The very first morning of the regional forum is sitting there all bright and fresh and ready to go. And the president, Linda Scott, who's the president of the Australian Local Government Association, she's a Sydney city councillor, and she stood up and said within the first 2 minutes, but probably sooner than that, in her opening address, said financial sustainability is the number one issue faced by councils across the nation, which we've talked about a little bit, but without a doubt, that is the number one issue faced by councils. All the wonderful things that we can do as councils, we can't do them if we're not financially sustainable. And you can only have to see that with, in New South Wales example, the special rate variations that were applied for last year and this year. Last year, 17 councils across the state applied for a special rate variation above rate pegging.
Yep.
This year, another 9 councils applied for a special rate variation. And you probably think the numbers drop off a little bit this year because it's an election year. So that might be the case. So next year, there might be more than 17 come forward. So there's no doubt about it.
Yep.
And then the first, after the opening address by Linda, then the first speaker to say welcome everyone was Kristen McBain, the minister.
Yep.
And she actually talked about initially the importance for everyone to be in this room. And she saw that as important from her perspective. She said, I'm in there fighting for local government, and if 10 people turn up to a conference, it's pretty hard for me to say the support by local government to enact change. When I look around the room and see a room full of people, then fantastic, thank you.
It gives gravitas to what I can now do.
Yeah, that's right. And I think also she understands the learning and the information you'll get out of that. So regional forum on day one, that was a great start. There were a few speakers that spoke about various things. And again, I won't go into detail all of those. We'd spend 3 hours on talking about that. But one of the parts in the afternoon was a breakout session. And there were 4 different breakouts. I went along to the renewable energy breakout and had a listen to that. And a couple of things struck me during that. I think we are well and truly in advance of many areas of the nation. Some of the issues that were brought forward, there were some speakers there, some panel of people there, but also just people from the audience. And listening to the questions there, I actually thought that we've done well where we're up to at this stage, and we're quite advanced. And there's some challenges for people to go through, but I think they can learn from other councils. So I don't love to be a hero at these conferences and jump up every 5 minutes, but if there's something I think that I can add to the conversation, I'll jump up and grab a microphone. So I did that, and I spoke about three examples where everyone seems to be just saying, how much money are we going to get? How many community benefit funds are we going to be able to access? What dollars can we get? How do we do that? How do we get better money? Or some people are still saying we should stop it all. It's all climate change is a bit of a joke. So there's still a few people in the room saying that. They get drowned out a little bit, I must admit. But I think it's more about that. So I stood up and spoke about three examples from our council, not just about putting our hand out for money in those three examples. The Squadron Energy one, where we talked about that $3.6 million. So I spoke about that as an innovative way to get some money. I spoke about the 10 hectares of land that we're leasing to one of the proponents for them to put the underground infrastructure in, to build essentially a housing estate for their short-term needs, but then leave that for our long-term needs. So again, huge benefits to our community. And talked about the React Centre and the fact that we've now got 4 proponents that have kicked in $50,000 each, so $200,000 for a feasibility study for that React. And I did a trademark after the React Centre so they don't go and steal it from other areas.
Now, you're not jumping the gun here from the point of view of trying to tell these other people about this. We want to get this thing on the ground first, don't we? So these other buggers don't go and steal it.
But I am a big fan of sharing things with other council areas.
So you're a nice bloke.
And, well, I think that helps everyone. But we're so far advanced with the feasibility study. We're at $200,000 for the feasibility study. So I think we're going a long way down the path. So for someone else to catch up, they'd have to get running very quickly. Yeah. But that was met with a round of applause around the room. So when I thought there were a few people who were a bit negative about renewables, then when I stood up and I was brave to say something positive about renewables and how you can actually gain some funds in different ways, there was a resounding round of applause around the room, which I thought was interesting because when you listen to the people talking, most of the people got up were very negative about it and had issues with it. But I think sometimes the positive people stay a bit quiet and the negative ones are a bit louder. So anyway, that was interesting. So that's
the interesting thing there is we talked about creativity and the importance of creativity in regards to this. The 3 ideas which you've mentioned there all weren't relying on federal governments or state governments to come and give more money or to come in and assist. That they're all new initiatives that have come forward that from a local council base.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's about working with proponents, having conversations rather than saying to a proponent, give us more money or you're not giving us enough or we don't like what you're doing. Talk to those proponents and see it's going to happen. We're not the consent authority. We can't stop it, but how can we take advantage of it? So I think that's important. So, and then that night we had a combined dinner just with the Regional Capitals Australia members that were there and the Regional Cities New South Wales members that were there. So it was only a fairly small dinner, but again, sharing some ideas. And so one of the questions I got at that dinner, for example, was from another council who had seen our Mayoral Developers Forum. We've spoken about that before. And this councillor was interested in that and just wondered how they could produce some more development or encourage some more development and had some questions about that. Is it a bed of corruption when you get these together? I mean, that's some view that some people
normal
have.
Fears, I'd suggest. That
that's
people
right.
sort of normally face.
But also, what are the positives? How much does it cost in terms of the involvement of staff to put the whole thing on? Is there a huge cost to that? What are the benefits? So you get questions from different people about that. Not at that particular dinner, but earlier on that day, I had a couple of other councillors talking to me about the sale yards and what happened there, and they gave me their experience in their particular community. So there are typically questions around some of those type of things. So that was all pretty good. The second 2 days, so that was the first day, the regional forum. The next 2 days was the National General Assembly, the old-fashioned NGA. Yep. So that was where we went through and, again, had some different presentations, some different speakers, a couple of the guest speakers. Annabelle Crabb from the ABC spoke.
Yes.
And it was interesting. Sometimes you do hear from different people about the impact social media is having on them. Some people get a bit concerned about their social media. Yep. Annabelle said that she basically doesn't do much with social media at all anymore.
Her personally,
because she said, I didn't need to start my day with 100 people telling me what a horrible person I was.
Yeah.
Maybe I could do it differently, so I basically gave up on that. And I did read an article recently where Chris Minns, the Premier of New South Wales, has said something similar where he said, I took all social media off my phone, and he said the number 30, but I didn't need to start my day with 30 people telling me what a horrible person I was.
You are and that sort of stuff.
All the rest of it. And the president, it was with Annabelle Crabb, it was more or less a couch conversation. So the president sat down with Annabelle Crabb and talked about that. And the president, again, I mentioned her before, Linda Scott, she said something along the lines of, well, we know what you think because you've got a room full of people here that experience that same sort of thing every day. Yeah. And then she made a offhand comment and said, so who out there has got some form of group or Keep Council Honest or the residents group who just give you a hammering every day? And the whole audience put their hand up and groaned with, oh, yes, that's exactly what we've got. So it's probably good for council sometimes to hear that, to go, oh, I thought it was just me, but it's everywhere across the state, across the nation, all these councils. So there was that common shared bond, if you like.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realise, I had a talk to another particular gentleman who is a new mayor this time, and we were just chatting about something in particular, and we were talking about this conversation afterwards, and he said, oh, Matt, he said, I really appreciate the help you've given me over the last couple of years. Now, look, I've taken a couple of phone calls from him, had a couple of chats at conferences, and I didn't think I'd done much, but he said just being able to share some of my frustrations and realise that there's someone that had been there before and done it before.
Problem shared is a problem halved.
That's right. And so I didn't realise I had much of an impact on this particular gentleman, but he was very thankful for my little tiny bit of help that I've given him. But again, I think that's the thing. Yeah. Someone that you can share some of these issues with and problems with. So when you go to a conference, just sometimes sitting around at the lunch break, chatting to random people in general and say, how you feeling, that can be really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting, with the social media sort of side of things. It's, my mother used to always sort of say to me that when you're in public company and speaking to people, always believe the fact your grandmother is standing beside you, and would you say if your grandmother was standing beside you? Yep. My take on the social media side of things is a little bit similar to that, but I take a different sort of point of angle. To the people out there who consistently want to always write these negative comments to not just you, but to other people as well, a lot of these people are adults. They're not kids. They're adults who are supposedly educated in their own area of expertise, whatever the case may be. My question to you would be, is to those people who make those comments, would you write that comment on your child's post, on your child's Facebook post or your child's Instagram post? Because undoubtedly, if someone wrote that on your child's post, you would be up in arms. How dare you? It's bullying, it's harassment, whatever the case may be. What gives you then the right to turn around and to do that? So my question to you would be, to these people out there who make those sort of comments, would you say the same thing on your own child's post?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I actually find what's interesting is sometimes you'll read some of these things that people say, and I try not to read too much of it, the same way as Annabelle Crabb and Chris Minns. But you'll see those people in the flesh sometimes, and you say g'day, and you're waiting for them to
give you a tirade.
That's right. Yeah. And they say g'day.
Yeah.
Have a nice day.
Yes.
And you think, well, now's the opportunity for you to engage in a conversation. Right. And if you want to influence the decision-making process or set someone on the right path, because obviously they've got the path wrong, here's your opportunity to have a face-to-face conversation and discuss that. And again, I talk about that a lot. My mobile phone number, 0418 639 053.
Yeah.
Make a phone call if you want.
That's
My
right.
email address, mayor@dubbo.nsw.gov.au.
That's right.
All of these are out there.
I'm available anytime.
That's right. So, well, not any time, because sometimes I'm on the phone already or in a meeting, but
plus you do like to sleep occasionally as well.
And well, not that much, but yeah. So I'll get back to people. So
that's right.
That night we had another dinner. So that was again the NGA, the assembly dinner. So again, that's good. You sit down at a random table. I sat down at a random table. Hi, how you going? Where you from? And there were I think there were 4 Darwin councillors there and the Darwin CEO at the table. So again, Darwin, long way from Canberra, a bit longer trip than I had to make to get there. Yeah. But again, what's happening in Darwin? What are the big things in Darwin? And just,
I bet you a lot of those problems are very similar too.
It's
same but different, maybe.
Similar in theme, but the specifics. I always like to drill down. A lot of the times when I meet someone new from a different council area, what's happening? What's the buzz? What's the conversation at the moment in your particular area? And Darwin was interesting. They have had some boom and bust with some different projects. So housing was impossible to get for a while there because there was one big project that happening, and that project finished. Then housing was available. It was too cheap, and people were losing their investments, or not losing, but not getting great return for their investments. And then the next thing that comes along now. So a whole range of different things, but it's, again, just interesting to hear from different people from around the nation. Yeah. So the next day, we had motions debated there, of course. So 150 motions approximately had to get through.
Right.
Next day, Samuel Johnson was the keynote speaker. Now,
yes, and he was in Dubbo last year, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, yeah. And so he was featured in the Archibald Prize exhibition, and he gave a very rousing, I suppose, focus on just trying to do some good in the community. Got a standing ovation at the end of his discussion. Yeah, yes, that was nice. And then debated the motions, which is when the Dubbo one came up. Yeah. And then that night was kind of the first part of the Australian Council of Local Government. So we had a dinner at Parliament House. Yeah. And the great thing about that is that you've got Parliament sitting and you've got good access to ministers. So you did get a number of ministers that came along, and that's fantastic because you get a chance to talk to them. At the beginning, it started off with Anthony Albanese there.
I was going to say, because I did see a post with you standing next to a certain Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's right. Now,
was that at this dinner? That
was the dinner, exactly right. And what's fascinating about that is that he is treated a bit like a rock star there.
Oh, is he?
He comes along and he probably doesn't have a lot of time to talk to lots of people around the room because everyone would like to say good day and push something forward, but you're probably not going to get very far because everyone's going to be trying to push their barrel and he's going to not remember all these different conversations.
Yeah.
But I walked in and as I walked in there were 5 or 7 people in a line. I went, oh, do you have to line up to get in? They said, oh, no, we're just going to get a photo with the PM. And I went, oh. And I was actually not going to worry about it. I thought, oh, yeah, what the heck. So I stood in the line and came along there. Go, Anthony, how you going? Yep, shook his hand, say good day from Dubbo, blah, blah. So, it wasn't a very long conversation, but smile for the photo, that's it. But what was good is you've got various ministers in the room and they didn't have a band on, they didn't have entertainment, they just had the dinner, but they said, and Anthony spoke, he said, I encourage you to go around. And in fact, I'll get them to stand up. So he had the minister stand up. So around the room, you looked and you recognised a few of them, some of them you didn't. But he said, I encourage you to go and have a conversation. The ministers know they're going to have trouble eating their dinner because they're going to have a conversation with various people. So I did that. I took advantage of that. And sometimes you get pretty good access to ministers. You can book in and meet with them, but it might be book in next month or 2 months' time. You've got to get down to Canberra and go and basically meet with them and have that time with them. Yep. But these sort of conversations are fantastic. So I always have a bit of a chat to Christine McBain. I do have a lot of time for her, and so it's good to have a bit of a quick catch-up. But she'd been around the conference, etc., a bit anyway, so there was ample opportunities to chat to Christy. But I thought a couple of ones are worth having a chat with. So Chris Bowen, I've certainly talked to Chris before. Chris was out here in Wellington when Squadron Energy were turning a sod of soil, and Twiggy and Chris were both here. And Chris made mention of myself in his speech there at that particular time, so he's obviously aware of Dubbo and obviously aware of me. But I just thought he'd be interested in that Squadron Energy one, the 3.6 million. And I said, Chris, I just thought this would be a little good news story for you to tuck away in the back of your mind, just to keep in mind where you can do things a bit differently. I told him that story briefly, and he knows about our React Centre. We've talked to him about that before, but I just gave him a follow-up to say we're now up to 4 proponents that have put in $200,000. So again, that's not government money. No, that's private money coming to help our feasibility. So he was certainly interested in those, and just I think it's good to keep them in the loop and keep them updated with that sort of thing. Yep. The other one I spoke to was Tony Burke, and I haven't really dealt with Tony before. He's got a couple of portfolios, but he's Minister for Arts. And so I started speaking to him about our public art strategy, and you could see him thinking, oh, here we go, he's going to hit me up for money here to try and fund a public art strategy. Yep. And I told him about the fact that we've got a green hydrogen or a firming power plant that will be relying on some green hydrogen, and there's no compulsion for a VPA. We know there's no compulsion anywhere, but it's not one of the traditional ones you'd see a VPA. But I said, we had a discussion with the proponent and said, we think there's some good you can do in the community. Here are some of our strategies. You pick one. It's really you donating money. And I said, we were quite pleased with the fact they picked our public art strategy. So now we've got $950,000 to start to deliver our public art strategy. Not government money.
His jaw would have dropped probably gone.
He thought it was fantastic. Yeah. He thought that was great. So when we do start to launch some things related to that, we'll make sure we send an invitation out. It's not government money, but he's the Minister for the Arts. And again, hopefully, that just sits away in the back of his mind and he thinks about that a little bit. And then we gets an invitation one day to come out with the launch of the public art strategy. Oh, that's right. I had that chat to that guy. And he might remember who I was or where I was from, but that'll just be enough to jog his memory. So you take advantage of those. Yep. And the last one I had a very interesting chat with was the Senator, the Honourable Carol Brown. She's the Assistant Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Now, when I was down in Canberra several months ago, I had a discussion with Carol as part of a group called Regional Capitals Australia. So we met with a few ministers and assistant ministers, and Carol was one of those. And Carol actually asked me about our 3D printed toilet. And she's, as I said, Assistant Minister for Infrastructure. Right. So she was very interested in that from an infrastructure perspective.
In Canberra, or?
Well, she likes the idea of it being used to help solve some of our housing crisis.
Yes.
Assistant Minister for Infrastructure, housing could be part of the infrastructure. Yeah. Normally you think about different things with infrastructure. Anyway, she said at that meeting, she said, I'd love to go and see that toilet there. Yeah. Sure thing. Whenever you'd like to come along, you're more than welcome. And so I saw her. I thought, I'll go and catch up with Carol. So I sat down beside Carol. I said, Carol, now you did say...
toilet invitation.
Yeah, that's right. You did want to say you want to come and see our toilet. Would you like to see my toilet? And she said, oh, Matthew, I haven't had the chance, but I do want to get out there.
It's a high priority for me.
Well, I'll tell you what to do, Matthew. Across the other side of the table, there's my Chief of Staff. He organises my life, so I want to get out there and have a look at it. Go over there and tell him that I said that I want to get out there and have a look at it. So line it up with him and then make it happen. So I went over and
Carol wants to come and see my toilet.
That's
All
right, exactly
Book her in,
right.
please.
How do you start that conversation?
That's right.
So I had a good chat to the chief of staff, gave him my card, he's got my details, and I said, whenever you can, Carol would love to see it as soon as possible. Get out there and have a look at it. And then he wanted to know all about it. What's this toilet? I've heard a little bit about that. Tell me more details about this.
Yeah.
So he was quite fascinated about that. So
Isn't that fantastic?
that was all fantastic, I thought.
Yeah.
And then that was at the dinner. The next day was the Australian Council of Local Government. And this again was basically, I suppose, a focus on the ministers, as I said before. So the day will start off with the Prime Minister coming along. So fantastic. That gives the whole day a higher level of importance that the day is opened by the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Christian McBain spoke again. She was hanging around the conference, as I said, so that was great.
Yep.
And then you had some different panels that talked about different areas. Probably the panel that I found the most interesting was the renewable energy panel. So you had Chris Bowen on that again, and you had Jenny McAllister, who we've met with before, who's the Assistant Minister. And so, again, interesting to hear the audience, interesting to hear the questions coming forward, interesting to hear just some of the responses. And Chris seems to be across the portfolio and seems to be very focused on delivering for the portfolio. So, again, different panels throughout the day, close the day, then finally jump back on a plane and go back. I was interviewed by the media twice down there. The Win News in Canberra wanted to get some impressions from different councils, so I'm not sure how they got onto me, but basically interviewed me at the beginning of the conference just to talk about what I was hoping to see out of the conference, what I thought of the morning so far, and then at the end of it, a bit of a wrap on what I saw during the conference. So interesting that there was a bit of an opinion sought from some of the local media, some of the Canberra media from different councils around the nation.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's it sort of goes to show the value of attending these conferences as well. It's the fact that what you've just spoken about just then, the access to these people and the ideas that are being presented.
That was 4 days summarised into 15 minutes or 20 minutes, however long it was.
I think you've done very, very well. Now, I know you love your citizenship ceremonies. Is there one coming up this week, and can we come along?
I'd love you to come along.
Can you? Oh, cool.
I'd love people to come along to these. They are exciting.
Yes.
They are uplifting is probably the word that comes to mind for me is uplifting. We've got 17 new citizens, well, not new citizens, people that are here in our country that will become
17.
Aussie citizens. 17, that's right. A range of different countries as we see typically. So that's on Tuesday, the 9th of July at 3:30 p.m. at the theatre, the Dubbo Regional Theatre and Convention Centre.
Yeah.
And I remember back in the old days we used to have them in our downstairs conference room, but they're too big for that now. By the time you get the conferees, some family members or some friends come along, you almost see a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio for each person that's becoming a new citizen. So it's
awesome?
It's a good big group. But it is, they're so excited.
Yep.
They've been in the country for years. You can't become a citizen just by turning up yesterday. So you've been in the country, typically I'd say most of them have been in the country for 5 or 6 years, sometimes 10, sometimes longer than that. But they're excited that they're becoming an Aussie citizen.
It's great, isn't it?
They're pretty happy about all that. So I'd encourage people to come along. The more people that are in the audience and the more people to say welcome, then I think that's more exciting for them.
Oh, it's wonderful. And this is once every 3 months we hold these, is that right?
Oh, about every 2 months now. We
2
got to the
months
stage
now.
where they're getting too big.
Yeah.
So we've got this one now, and I think we've even got another one towards the end of August before the September elections to make sure we've got another one done before that. So
brilliant.
It used to be every 3 months, and we used to get a small number of people, and that's grown over the years, and it was getting to the stage where we were getting too many every 3 months, so now every 2 months. So
I do enjoy our chats, and I will enjoy our chat, of course, next week, the podcast, to find out some of the stories about our new citizens as well.
Well, you'll know all about it because you'll come along with the citizenship
That's exactly
ceremony.
right. Dubbo Parkrun. You and I both love the old Dubbo Parkrun. Well, it celebrates a special milestone this week. Now, I know you like to cut cakes and ribbons like all good politicians. Well, we see you at Parkrun this week. I haven't seen you for a couple of weeks with a knife in your hand. You have to be careful with a knife in your hand, though.
I do have to be careful. I won't run with it, I promise. But I have been very slack lately. I've had a bunch of stuff on that I've just been a bit too busy and excuses. I'll give you excuses now.
Yeah.
So
Don't give me excuses. Give me results.
I've actually made a couple of parkruns in Sydney when I happen to have been down there at different times on a weekend. But I haven't been to the Dubbo Parkrun for a long time, which I do miss because I have what I call parkrun friends or parkrun acquaintances, people that I would not normally speak to on day to day. I wouldn't know their phone number, but at parkrun I'll have a good 15-minute chat to them after parkrun.
You talk about a good way to start a Saturday.
Yeah,
Parkrun.
Exactly right. So they are celebrating their 9th birthday
That's
this
unreal,
Saturday.
isn't it, eh?
So this Saturday would be the 13th of July.
Yep.
And so I'd encourage people to go along. It's great to see a big crowd. I know it's a bit cold at the moment, but as you said, when you did parkrun this week.
It was about 6 or 7 degrees. It was beautiful. The sun was out. It was
and
lovely.
as long as the sun's out, that's the thing. If the sun's out, you
absolutely.
can handle it 6 or 7 degrees. So go along. They're always good celebrations. There will be a cake there. I am saying some words. I'm not sure if they're going to trust me with a knife in my hand, but I am saying some words there just to congratulate them. But what a great event. And still to have the original founders, if you like, that original people from that committee.
Yes.
And I was about to say a name, and I'm hesitating now because I'm thinking there's so many people on the committee.
That's right.
If I say,
it's quite a group these days, isn't it?
that's right.
Yeah.
If I say two people's names, like, what the heck I'll say? If I say Tim and Miriam, but again, really drive Miriam in particular, but Tim and Miriam have done great things from the beginning.
Yes.
But there are people there, I'm sure, that have been involved for many years. I mean, John
Johnny
Robbins
comes to hand.
he got an award last year in our November Dubbo Day Awards. He got an award for his involvement in parkrun.
Brilliant.
So
and all the volunteers each week.
That's right. And so now I'm in trouble because I've mentioned 3 names.
Oh, that's right. You always miss somebody if you start mentioning names.
That's right. I've done the unforgivable, but for all the parkrun volunteers out there, but all the parkrun participants as well, it makes it a great event with so many people going along.
Strength, it really does.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely right. So yes, I'll be there. Encourage people to come along and say hello.
Well, it's going to be good to see you back there, mate, and pushing it out, I'm sure.
Indeed, pushing it.
Well, we got through a lot there today. Matt, it's been a big podcast, lots of discussions. I really enjoyed the one in regards to Canberra in particular, to hear your feedback from what happened down there. But, of course, we get to the end of the podcast. It's always time for the Limerick of the Week. So what have you got for us this week?
Well, I'll pick up on your thing there. You liked the Canberra discussion, so I'll go with the Canberra
good on
talk.
you. Well done.
While in Canberra, the talk was intense to make every dollar make sense. From spending to saving and projects worth braving, we will balance the fiscal expense.
That's a very clever one. There were some big words in there, as I would say. Some big words that sort of bring in there together.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked that one.
Oh, I liked it. It was very, very good. All right, buddy. Well, thank you very much again for all your thoughts and input for this week. We'll see you next week. And to all everyone out there, have a wonderful week. Until then, take care.
Straight from the mayor's mouth with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.